Every disciple Jesus ever chose, the 12, nobody expected. Picture a hiring committee. You need 12 people. 12 people who will carry the most important message in human history across borders, oceans, languages, and centuries. 12 people on whom everything depends. If they fail, the movement dies. If they crack, the mission collapses. So, who do you pick? You pick the educated. You pick the well-connected. You pick the morally spotless, the politically safe, the theologically credentialed. You pick people from the right families, the right towns, the right synagogues. You pick people who will not embarrass you. That is what you do if you are anyone other than Jesus of Nazareth. Because what Jesus did was something so strange, so counterintuitive, so completely backwards from every human logic that 2,000 years later, scholars are still arguing about why he did it. He walked to a lake. He walked to a tax booth. He walked into crowds of sick people and broken people, and people the religious establishment had already written off. And he pointed, you and you and you, fisherman, a tax collector, a political terrorist, a man who would betray him for 30 pieces of silver, a man who would deny him 3 times before sunrise, a man so full of doubt he would put his fingers into nail wounds before he would believe. These are the 12. And by the time you finish this video, you will understand something that most people who have sat in church their entire lives have never quite grasped. That the choosing of the 12 disciples is not a footnote to the gospel. It is the gospel in miniature, told 12 times over. Stay with me. Before we get to the names, and we will get to all of them one by one, I want you to understand the world Jesus was walking into when he started building his team. It is the year roughly 30 AD. Palestine is occupied territory. Rome controls the roads, the taxes, the courts, and the execution methods. Herod Antipas controls Galilee on Rome's behalf. The Pharisees control the synagogues. The Sadducees control the temple. And ordinary Jewish people are caught in the middle of all of it. Taxed by Rome, taxed by the temple, squeezed by local rulers, and told by the religious elite that if they were suffering, it was probably their own fault for not following the law correctly. Into this world, a carpenter from Nazareth, a town so obscure that when one of the future disciples first hears about it, his response is literally, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Into this world, this carpenter begins calling people to follow him. Here is what you need to know about the rabbinic system Jesus was operating inside. In first century Judaism, if you wanted to become a disciple of a rabbi, you applied. You presented your credentials. You demonstrated your knowledge of Torah. And if the rabbi decided you were good enough, he accepted you. If you were not selected, you went home and learned a trade. Being a fisherman or a tax collector was not a romantic choice in ancient Palestine. It was what you did when the religious establishment had already decided you were not rabbi material. This is not a story about 12 men who won a religious competition. This is not a story about 12 men who earned their spots through excellence. This is not a story about the best and the brightest rising to the top. This is a story about 12 men who had already been told they were not good enough, and one rabbi who disagreed. Now, watch what happens. The first 4 disciples Jesus calls are fishermen, and Luke chapter 5 gives us the scene in extraordinary detail. Simon, who will become Peter, has been fishing all night and caught nothing. He is exhausted, salt-crusted, probably in a foul mood. Jesus climbs into his boat and asks to use it as a platform to teach the crowd gathered on the shore. Simon agrees, probably more from politeness than faith. Then Jesus tells him to push out into deep water and let down his nets. And Simon, and you can hear the fatigue in his voice even across 2,000 years of translation, Simon says, "Master, we have worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." What comes next is so enormous that when Simon sees it, he falls to his knees in a boat that is sinking under the weight of the catch. And he says something that should stop you cold. He does not say, "This is amazing." He does not say, "Thank you." He says, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." That is the first moment you see who Simon Peter really is. Not the bold one, not the rock, the one who knows exactly how unworthy he is and says so out loud. And Jesus says, here is the call. Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. The Greek word used here for fish for people is zogron, which means literally to catch alive, to take something that was dead and make it live. Simon did not know it yet, but Jesus was not just giving him a job. Jesus was telling him what he himself was about to become. A man caught alive by grace, a man made to live again. Andrew, Simon's brother, is there that day too. And there is a quiet tragedy to Andrew that you notice once you start looking. He is always in Simon's shadow. In every list of the 12, Andrew is mentioned immediately after Peter, the also ran, the footnote brother. And yet Andrew is the one who, in John chapter 1, runs to find his brother the moment he meets Jesus. He finds Simon and says, "We have found the Messiah." Andrew did not wait. Andrew did not calculate. Andrew ran. The church historians, Eusebius among them, record that Andrew eventually carried the gospel to what is now modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Greece. He died on an X-shaped cross, a saltire, because he reportedly said he was not worthy to die on the same shape of cross as his Lord. In Scotland, that cross became a national symbol. The flag of Scotland carries Andrew's cross to this day. The footnote brother ended up on a flag, but it gets stranger. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, are there in the boats too. And Jesus gives them a nickname that has puzzled commentators for centuries. He calls them Boanerges, the sons of thunder. Now, Sons of Thunder sounds impressive in a movie trailer, but look at what these two men actually do with that nickname in the Gospels. In Luke chapter 9, a Samaritan village refuses to let Jesus pass through because he is heading to Jerusalem. James and John, the sons of thunder, turn to Jesus and say, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" They want to incinerate a village because the village was inhospitable. Jesus rebukes them and moves on. Later, in Mark chapter 10, James and John go to Jesus privately, without telling the other disciples, and ask him to guarantee them the two best seats in his coming kingdom, the seat on his right, the seat on his left. Jesus asks them if they can drink the cup he is about to drink. They say yes without hesitating. They have no idea what they are saying. The other 10 disciples find out about this private request, and the Gospels say they were indignant, which is a polite word for furious. Here is what most people miss. The sons of thunder, this impulsive, ambitious, fire-calling pair, are placed by Jesus in his innermost circle. Peter, James, and John are the three who go up the mountain of transfiguration, the three who go deeper into the Garden of Gethsemane, the three who see things no other disciple sees. Jesus did not put the polished people in the inner circle. He put the thunder in. And John, the younger of the two, will live the longest of all the 12. He will outlive everyone. He will watch his brother James become the first of the 12 to die. executed by Herod Agrippa around 44 AD, according to Acts chapter 12. He will watch Peter die. He will watch the Jerusalem church scatter. He will be exiled to a volcanic island in the Aegean Sea called Patmos, and there, old and alone, he will write the last book of the Bible. Hold that thought. We will come back to Patmos. The next disciple Jesus calls breaks every social rule in first century Palestine in a single sentence. Matthew chapter 9. Jesus sees a man named Levi sitting at a tax collection booth and says, "Follow me." And Levi gets up and follows. Now, you need to understand what a tax collector was in Roman Palestine. Tax collectors were Jews who worked for Rome. They collected the occupiers' money from their own people. They were permitted by Roman law to collect more than the official rate and keep the difference, which most of them did. They were considered traitors. They were barred from Jewish courts. They could not serve as witnesses. They were ranked by the rabbis alongside prostitutes and Gentiles as people who had placed themselves outside the covenant community. Levi, whom we know better as Matthew, was that man. And Jesus walked up to that booth and said, "Follow me." Matthew immediately throws a party. He invites all his tax collector friends and sinners. And the Pharisees, watching from outside, say to the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus hears them and says, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." The man who was excluded from giving testimony in a Jewish court will write the first gospel. The man whose word no rabbi would accept will give us one of our 4 accounts of the life of Christ. Matthew's gospel begins with a genealogy, a legal document, a record of lineage, which is exactly what a tax collector, trained in legal record keeping, would think to provide. Matthew's profession, the one that made him an outcast, became the exact tool Jesus used to write a gospel. Here's the part nobody tells you. Jesus did not call Matthew in spite of who he was. He called Matthew because of what Matthew could become when grace got hold of what Matthew already knew how to do. Philip and Nathanael come next, and their story is one of the most human in all 4 Gospels. Philip goes to find Nathanael and tells him about Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, son of Joseph. Nathanael's response, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" Not exactly a ringing endorsement of the hometown. Nazareth was a small agricultural village in Lower Galilee. No significant history, no famous alumni, no strategic importance. Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, catalogs Galilean cities extensively in his Jewish wars, and Nazareth does not even appear. It was that obscure. But Philip does not argue. He says 3 words, "Come and see." And when Jesus sees Nathanael approaching, he says something that floors him. "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael says, "How do you know me?" Jesus says, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael's response is immediate and complete. "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus gently reframes it. "You believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that." What was Nathanael doing under the fig tree? We are not told. The rabbis taught that sitting under a fig tree was a posture for prayer and meditation on Torah. Some scholars suggest Nathanael was praying, perhaps praying about the very Messiah Philip was about to tell him about. Whatever it was private. It was between him and God, and Jesus had seen it. Here is what most people miss about Nathanael's story. He starts with skepticism and ends with worship. Not because Jesus argued him into faith, but because Jesus showed him he was already known. not judged, known. You can be skeptical. You can ask the hard questions. You can say, Nazareth? Really? And Jesus will look at you and name the thing you thought nobody saw. Now, we are halfway through the 12, and I want to make a request. If this video is opening something up for you, if the story of the disciples is hitting different than you expected, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right now. Because next week, we are going all the way into the book of Acts to follow what happens to these men after the resurrection. You do not want to miss that one. We continue. Thomas. The disciple history has been unfair to. He has been called Doubting Thomas for 20 centuries, reduced to a single moment of grief-stricken disbelief, and we have largely forgotten the rest of him. Here's the rest of Thomas. In John chapter 11, when Jesus announces he is going back to Judea, where people have recently tried to stone him, the disciples are alarmed. It is Thomas who says to the others, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." That is not doubt. That is courage of the darkest, most clear-eyed kind. Thomas looked at the danger, assessed the odds, and said, "Let's go anyway." His moment of doubt comes after the resurrection. The other disciples tell him they have seen Jesus. Thomas, who was not there, says, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." 8 days later, Jesus appears again. He goes directly to Thomas. He does not rebuke him publicly. He does not shame him. He holds out his hands and says, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas's response is the highest Christological confession in the Gospel of John. He says 2 words, "My Lord and my God." The church fathers, Origen, Eusebius, and later Jerome, record that Thomas eventually carried the gospel east of the Roman Empire entirely, all the way to India. There is a Christian community in Kerala, India, that traces its founding to Thomas himself, nearly 2,000 years old. They call themselves the Thomas Christians. The doubter went further than almost anyone. James, the son of Alphaeus. Thaddeus, also called Judas, the son of James. Simon the Zealot. These 3 are the quiet ones, the ones the Gospels mention by name in the list, and then go almost completely silent about. We know that Simon was a zealot, which in first century terms meant he belonged to a political movement committed to violent resistance against Rome. He believed, before he met Jesus, that the kingdom of God would come on the edge of a sword. And sitting next to him at the table, Matthew, the Roman collaborator, a tax collector and a revolutionary, a man who worked for Rome and a man who wanted to burn Rome to the ground. In any other context, these 2 men would have been enemies. In any synagogue, any marketplace, any political gathering in first century Palestine, Simon the Zealot would have had contempt for Matthew the tax collector, and Matthew would have feared Simon. Jesus put them in the same team of 12 and told them to love each other. That, right there, is the most radical political act in the entire New Testament. Not a march, not a manifesto, a dinner table. Pay attention to this. The kingdom of Jesus has always been the place where the people who were supposed to hate each other find out they are family. Now, we come to the 2 disciples most people think they know, and most people are wrong about both of them. Judas Iscariot. Let us be careful here, because Judas is easy to hate. And when something is easy to do, it is usually worth slowing down. Judas was chosen by Jesus. That is not a minor detail. That is the first thing you have to sit with. Jesus, who reportedly could read what was in a man's heart, who saw Nathanael under the fig tree, who knew what Simon Peter would become, This same Jesus looked at Judas Iscariot and said, "You come with me." For roughly 3 years, Judas traveled with Jesus. He heard the Sermon on the Mount. He watched the feeding of the 5,000 from 12 feet away. He was in the boat during the storm when Jesus stood up and told the wind to be quiet. He held the bread at the Last Supper and heard Jesus say, "One of you will betray me." He looked Jesus in the face and said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." And Jesus said, "You have said so." Judas went out. It was night. The 30 pieces of silver he was paid was the price of a slave under Mosaic law. Specifically, the compensation owed if your ox gored someone else's slave. The chief priests were putting a very specific valuation on the Son of God, and Judas accepted it. Matthew chapter 27 records what happened after. When Judas saw that Jesus had been condemned, he was seized with remorse. He went back to the chief priests, threw the silver into the temple, and went out and hanged himself. Remorse, not repentance. The Greek word here is asterisk metamalomai asterisk, not asterisk metanoia asterisk. He was sorry, but he did not believe sorry was enough. He did not believe there was a way back. And that failure of hope may be the most heartbreaking thing in the entire Passion narrative. The Son of God died for everyone in that courtyard, for the soldiers who divided his clothes, for Peter who had denied him 3 times, for everyone who had shouted, "Crucify him," and Judas who had been closer to Jesus than almost anyone, could not bring himself to believe it included him. Do not be too quick to condemn Judas, because the question Judas could not answer is the same question that keeps people from God in every century. Is the grace really that wide? Does it really cover this? Does it reach this far down? The answer the New Testament gives is yes. But Judas never waited long enough to hear it. And then there is Simon Peter. We have already met Peter at the boat, but you need the full picture. Peter is the most present disciple in all 4 Gospels. He speaks more than any other disciple. He acts more, sometimes wisely, more often recklessly. He is the one who walks on water and then sinks. He is the one who says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And then, 5 minutes later, tries to talk Jesus out of going to the cross, prompting Jesus to say to him, to his face, "Get behind me, Satan." He is the one who draws a sword in the Garden of Gethsemane and cuts off a man's ear. He is the one who runs to the empty tomb. He is the one who jumps out of a boat in the Sea of Galilee because he cannot wait for the boat to get to shore where Jesus is standing. And he is the one who, on the night Jesus needed him most, sat in a courtyard warming his hands by a fire. And when a servant girl said, "You were with that man from Galilee," he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." 3 times before the rooster crowed, exactly as Jesus had predicted. Luke records something that John chapters 20 and 21 make almost unbearable in context. He says that after the 3rd denial, Jesus, being led away by soldiers, turned and looked at Peter, just looked at him. And Peter went outside and wept bitterly. Now, John chapter 21. After the resurrection, the disciples are back in Galilee, back at the lake, back fishing, back to the thing they knew before Jesus called them. Peter has denied Jesus. He knows it. He has not yet been reinstated, redeemed, given back anything. He is just fishing, trying to go back to what he was. Jesus appears on the shore. Peter does not wait for the boat. He jumps in and swims. And when he gets there, Jesus has a charcoal fire going. He is cooking fish. He feeds them breakfast first. He does not open with rebuke. He opens with a meal. And then he asks Peter 3 times, once for each denial. Simon, son of John, do you love me? 3 times, 3 denials, 3 questions, 3 chances to say yes. The third time, Peter is hurt that Jesus asks a third time. He says, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. The man who failed publicly, spectacularly, exactly as predicted. Jesus did not replace him. Jesus reinstated him. And Peter will go on to preach on the day of Pentecost and see 3,000 people come to faith in a single morning. Peter will write 2 letters that are still in your Bible. Peter will, according to church tradition, and the early testimony of Clement, Ignatius, and Tertullian, be crucified in Rome, upside down, at his own request, because he did not feel worthy to die the same way as his Lord. The man who said he did not know Jesus died for Jesus, upside down. And that brings us back, finally, to John on Patmos. He is old now, the last of the 12 still living. Everyone else is gone. James, his brother, executed by Herod decades ago. Peter, crucified in Rome. Matthew, according to tradition, martyred in Ethiopia. Thomas, killed in India. Andrew on his saltire cross. Philip, Bartholomew, Thaddeus, Simon, James, the son of Alphaeus, all of them gone. Every single one of them dead for the message they carried. John is in exile on a volcanic island. Patmos is a small, rocky island in the Aegean Sea, approximately 13 square miles of black volcanic rock and scrub. The Romans used it as a penal colony for political prisoners. John has been sent there because the message he carries is considered dangerous enough to exile an old man for. And it is on this island, alone, exiled, the last survivor, that John receives the revelation of Jesus Christ. He falls on his face before a vision of the risen Jesus. Eyes like blazing fire, feet like bronze glowing in a furnace, a voice like the sound of rushing waters. And from his knees, he begins to write. The first thing Jesus says to him, do not be afraid. The same voice, the same words, all the way to the end. Here is what I want you to see before we close. John, the son of thunder, the man who once asked Jesus to burn down a Samaritan village, ends up writing the words, God is love. 4 times he writes it in various forms across his letters. The man Jesus had to teach not to call fire from heaven became the man who taught the church what love actually looks like. Thunder, refined by grace, becomes love. That is what being a disciple does to a person. So let me give you 3 things to carry out of here. First, Jesus does not choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. Every single one of the 12 was dismissed, overlooked, or written off by the religious establishment of their time. Fishermen, tax collectors, terrorists, doubters, deniers, traitors. And from this material, this impossible, broken, impulsive, inadequate material, Jesus built the church that every one of us sitting here today is the downstream result of. Which means your inadequacy is not a disqualifier. It is the baseline requirement. Second, the diversity of the 12 is the point. A tax collector and a revolutionary, a skeptic from the wrong side of town, and a man who spoke first and thought second. A quiet Andrew and a thundering James. These men should have been incompatible. They should have destroyed each other. Instead, they built something together that outlasted every empire that tried to stop them. Because the thing that united them was not similarity. It was a shared encounter with the same person. Jesus does not call you to agree with everyone. He calls you to love them. There is a difference. And the 12 lived that difference for us. And third, the last thing, the one I want you to sit with longest, somewhere in this list of 12, there is a version of you. Maybe you are Peter, passionate, impulsive, capable of spectacular failure and spectacular recovery. Maybe you are Thomas, clear-eyed and skeptical and braver than anyone gives you credit for. Maybe you are Matthew, carrying a past that the religious world has already judged you for, not knowing that your exact history is what Jesus plans to redeem into something useful. Maybe you are Nathanael, sitting quietly under the fig tree with a question you have not spoken out loud yet, not knowing that you are already seen. The rabbi who chose 12 ordinary, broken, excluded people to carry the most important message in history. That same rabbi is still in the business of choosing. He looks across the crowd. He sees you. He says, "You, which of the 12 disciples hit you hardest in this video? Which one's story surprised you most or felt the most like yours? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this video gave you something, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not too broken to be chosen. And subscribe, because next week we are going into Acts and following every single one of these 12 men into the places where the story gets wild, the danger gets real, and the grace gets even bigger. I will see you there.